issues with Kagwa, all the truths you've never seen.
Welcome back to my channel, and today I want to be talking about a controversial issue that's been burning. It's about the USAID, the United States Agency for International Development. The other time I gave us a foundation about philanthropy, the act of donation, funding, and grants. Today, I thought I was going to follow up with another aspect of the USAID interventions, but the burning issues have actually necessitated this conversation I'm going to be having. A lot of persons have tagged me on videos showing me clips about a Congress member who accused the USAID of sponsoring Boko Haram terrorist groups around the world, and I laughed. Before I get into this argument, I want to share one theory that I studied last semester, and it has to do with the rationalization theory as well as the cognitive or the laziness theory. These are two theories. What does the rationalization theory say? It says people who are smarter and intelligent, who have a particular opinion, have a way of spinning narratives and making people believe it. And it's called myself bias, confirmation bias. And they do this to validate their arguments, and they use every opportunity to defend that position of theirs. For instance, you could have people who believe there's no such thing as climate change. And because there's no climate change, they could debate this in the Congress with their knowledge of science, and they try to invalidate any argument to say global warming, climate change is a hoax. Also, the 2020 US election that Trump also accused that it was rigged, some persons still believe that it was actually true. That's what the theory does, and those who understand this theory, they use it very well. Even politicians around the world, they hold on to those beliefs. Those conspiracy theorists as well, they hold on to such beliefs. On the other hand, the laziness group, which is the laziness theory, says that because people are lazy and unwilling to go beyond the headlines, it's easy to trick them with all kinds of information, and that's where the rationalization theory actually takes advantage of this group. So what's happening in the US currently is just a game, politics, propaganda, and it's because they understand that the young adult Americans, 40% of them rely on the social media for their news source, and that's why you're seeing all the things that is currently happening. But I will try as much as possible to go a little bit further in my arguments here. So I want us to first of all listen to this video, then I continue from there.
Musk, you said on X that an example of the fraud that you have cited was $50 million of condoms was sent to Gaza. But after fact-check this, apparently Gaza in Mozambique, and the program was to protect them against HIV. So can you correct this statement? It wasn't sent to Hamas actually, it was sent to Mozambique, which makes sense why condoms was sent there.
Yeah.
And how can we make sure that all the statements that you said were correct, so we can trust what you say?
Well, first of all, some of the things that I say will be incorrect and should be corrected. So nobody's going to bat 1,000. I mean, we will make mistakes, but we'll act quickly to correct any mistakes. I'm not sure we should be sending $50 million worth of condoms to anywhere, frankly. I'm not sure that's something Americans would be really excited about. And that is really an enormous number of condoms, if you think about it. But if it went to Mozambique instead of Gaza, I'm like, okay, that's not as bad, but still, why are we doing that?
That's Elon Musk there, the guy who is in charge of DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency. He tweeted, and everyone ran with it, that they were taking 50 million pieces of condom to Hamas, whereas he was going to Mozambique. And he came to ask, why was America doing that? The USAID has a budget, and Africa, like I continue to say, aid is what everyone gives globally. Aid didn't start with the United States of America. Aid didn't start with the USAID. The USAID replicated a template that fathers of modern philanthropy began to use. Elon Musk has been tweeting a lot of things, and people have been running with his misinformation and disinformation everywhere. He does not have his facts. How did they even get all they laid their hands on and they've been accusing the USAID of? You broke into a system. You didn't have an opportunity to have a sit down, have an audit, look at the program audit, look at financial audit, look at quality assurance and ask questions. You can't audit the USAID like you're auditing a business. This is a humanitarian agency that gives funding to other parts of the world. The USAID is a very meticulous institution. The USAID works through partnership. The USAID works with government. The USAID works with many stakeholders. But one thing I know is that the US does not joke with a penny of the taxpayers' money. And the USAID demonstrated this all through my career on projects that has to do with the USAID. How do you explain the fact that somebody is asking that 50 million condoms is going to Mozambique? Why is it happening? It is embarrassing that Elon Musk would stand to be asking this question. It meant that he was never briefed about the programs that that particular intervention was meant for. He does not have knowledge of the program. He does not understand that there are program strategies. He does not understand the impact, the outcomes. I'm sure he does not also understand the project that condoms were made for. And this is what they want the public to believe. They are not doing this because they really want to make government be efficient. They have a name. They know what they want to achieve. The USAID may have its own internal issues, no doubt. There's no perfect institution anywhere. But all we are seeing is a deliberate plot to do something. They are going to get there. But what they're doing currently is to play politics, disorganize the system, rebuild what they want, and at the end of the day, it's going to serve a certain purpose. Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency is a joke. He's been tweeting a lot of things and I read and I laugh. Elon Musk unfortunately has no information because he invaded the USAID. Instead of sitting down with them and planning a gradual process of winding down and rebuilding the USAID. You don't invade a system and expect to get results. Let's look at the next video and I'll deepen my conversations afterwards.
Representative from Tennessee, Mr. Burchett is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to submit for the record an article, Why Condoms Cannot Always Be Trusted. It's dated March 19th, 1993, and it goes on to say that USAID distributed around 800 million condoms last year, and this was in 93. The argument that condoms are not being distributed obviously has some holes in it, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Premerick, can you provide an example of USAID programs, USAID program that was harmful to the U.S. foreign interests? I probably didn't say your name right. I've said it.
That's okay, Congressman. Thank you.
Nobody gets. Jonathan Jackson still doesn't get Burchett right, so we're good.
Now, I've heard a lot about the issue of China, and I agree that it's very important to counter China, but the last 4 years went in the opposite direction. The strong counter-China infrastructure that we had developed over at USAID was simply dismantled by the next administration. I can't think of anything that's harmed the developing world than the climate agenda. It has pushed all of these countries, especially in Africa, to go green. Solar, wind, EV, who produces all of those materials?
Nationalization theory here.
And then on top of it, we tell them, no, you can't develop your own fossil fuel industry because it's anti-green. So what happens? They can't generate the revenues to create good jobs at home. They can't generate the revenues in order to finance their own health, education, and other needs, and it increases the price of energy, which does what to the poor? It hurts them. The climate agenda has done more in increasing poverty and increasing hunger than anything else. Of course, the resentment that's building up from around the world, that's much more conservative than we are on these woke things. It's extremely damaging. And look, a friend of mine at work provided me this morning with something that's very, very telling. Of the 19 of the top 20 countries receiving aid from USAID are part of the Belt and Road Initiative that China runs.
That's it. It's actually about 5 minutes, so I just want to have this framing. And this is the rationalization theory I also talked about. It's funny. He talked about condoms having holes and reading reports. When I was working on a USAID project, we realized that in the organization I worked, about 4 container load of condoms failed integrity test and they were sent back. We have a condom lab that is manned by the Ministry of Health, the NAFDAC, someone from the CDC, and one other agency of the government. And for every condom that gets into the country, it gets tested. And these are project condoms. And that's why sometimes when you look at condoms like the Gold Circle and they're quite cheap, you think they're actually cheap. But these are the safest condoms. I'm not promoting it here, but I'm telling you based on facts. These are the condoms that are tested, that we can vouch for, and they are condoms that have labs in the country. The other ones, I don't know how they get in. You can't even vouch for them. And someone is reading an article of 1993 in 2025, and USAID is in the spotlight here. And for every country that USAID is implementing any child-spacing or HIV interventions, then you have discussions around condoms. Most likely they are labs. So these guys have no knowledge, they have no information, they just want to lean on conspiracy and rationalization theory. But even when you need to employ rationalization theory, you need to also be armed with your facts. In this case, this man was presenting faulty information, and it's appalling. These are the kind of information people run with, and you see them misinforming their audience and also disinforming everyone. How do you explain that green energy is making everybody poor? How we explain to the world that China is profiteering from climate change arguments? I don't believe that most companies in China are owned by the Chinese alone. America is also establishing their industries in China. That we want safe environment is not enough to begin to say safe environment is breeding poverty. There are no data to back his arguments. It's a 5 minutes video, like I said, but all they keep saying is narrative, and it's completely laughable. So let's move to the next video as well.
Who gets some of that money? Does that name ring a bell to anybody in the room? Because your money, $697 million annually, plus the shipments of cash funds madrasas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, ISIS Khorasan, terrorist training camps. That's what it's funding. If you paid for it, somebody else got the money, you are paying for terrorism. This has got to end. I yield, Mr. Chairman.
I saw Nigerians running with this story, and I saw a lot of people spewing ignorance again. He's a congressman. He's been there, I think, from 2013 till date. The USAID's fund comes from the Congress. It's appropriated, it's approved, and the budget is overseen by the Congress where this guy belongs to. It means that they also look at the program strategy. They look at the vetting process of every contractor, every partner that the USAID works with. Is it not indicting to this same congressman that he's part of the process that vetted and approved the sponsorship of Boko Haram, ISIS, and the rest? We need to always go beyond the news. We need to investigate and dig deeper. And this is what cognitive theory encourages. That when we read on the internet, particularly the social media, even from me, there's an opportunity for you to dig deep. There are a lot of news sources, but you could dig to also fact check if the claims are true. I've looked everywhere to see if there's going to be any proof. There's none. Absolutely none. I'll give you certain instances today. They talked about funding transgender issues. There was a project we managed in Nigeria. It's called Ships for Maps. That project targeted the LGBTQ. It's a USAID project. Why did that project take place? That project was designed in such a way that research found out that the general population interventions we were doing, the infection rates had dropped, but there were new infection rates that were breeding, and it was within the LGBTQ community. So the LGBTQ we have in Nigeria, you don't have the straight gays or lesbians. You have complete bisexuals, people who swing both ways. And within that community, the level of, I don't want to use the word promiscuity, but I have no choice right now for want of words. And the level at which they tend to sleep with other partners is higher than the normal heterosexual guy. And what we needed to do was to do prevention intervention among the LGBTQ community, because we needed to prevent the general population. Some of the LGBTQ guys have wives at home. You don't even know. Some of the lesbians are married. And if we don't have a way of preventing that community, we will be running the risk of having a general population infection again. So it was a strategy to prevent the other people. We established treatment clinics for them. But every intervention we have different strategies, and there are models, what we call Peer Education Plus, and other intervention strategies put in place that you have like a 9 months course, 3-6 months, and we use the science of what they call behavior change. You don't condemn the behavior as you try to change it, but you also want to investigate, research, and find the best way of improving on that behavior. And a lot of times, having worked with different communities, be it the female sex workers, injection drug users, uniformed servicemen, male and female adult school youths, and other population, we realize that, for instance, if we work with the female sex workers, if we had a course of 9 months, sometimes we realize 2-3 persons eventually find a purpose in life and they leave what they do. They leave the sex work, or if it was IDU, which are the injection drug users and addiction, we try as much as we can. And their success rates are even moving people from that stage to another completely. And same with the LGBTQ as well. Sometimes conversations, and when they get deeper into their models, they begin to discuss even personal issues, and they leave that kind of lifestyle. But we don't condemn it. It's not our job to condemn it, but it's opportunity for us to prevent the general population because there's so much that's been put into prevention. And all these came out of research. The USAID looks at these things, backed it with research, and we implement. We also carry out research backed by the USAID funding. Also, there were times we worked in crisis communities. 4 times I've been in near-death experience. We've lost colleagues, and this is because sometimes you want to justify to the USAID amidst conflict why you need to intervene. And if the justification is legit, they give you the approval, in as much as it's a rare occurrence. And this is what the aid workers go through all the time. When I hear information about how the USAID is funding terrorism, it's funny. Sometimes when you need to get into certain communities, even if they are warring communities, you need to understand that you need to get there. One of the arguments they put forward was they were intervening in communities where the USAID had no presence, and they still needed to go in to provide education to the girl child in Afghanistan. We saw, despite the activities of the Taliban, one thing we will applaud the US for, the 20 years they spent in Afghanistan, was the fact that 20 years gave opportunity to a lot of women to acquire education for the first time in their lives. Today, the Department of Government Efficiency have jettisoned all that. The allegations are unfounded. I don't think Elon Musk saw any of the program strategies. America has established the USAID for humanitarian purposes, as well as the government's soft power institution. The USAID was not only in the business of healthcare, it was also looking at education, agriculture, politics, and you will agree with me that most of the food crops we have today in most of our countries were improvement on what we had, and the USAID funded them. We are talking about rice and cassava today. You'll be talking about the USAID and Gates Foundation. Who releases the funds for these research? Why have we been told overnight that the USAID made no gains, that there were no achievements beyond the frivolities they put out there for people to just jump at? The USAID vets everybody, including program staff, on every project. And I believe they did that in Afghanistan as well. They did that in Nigeria. They did that on every organization. And it's not the job of the USAID. They leave that to the US security arm, the FBI, and everyone. If you were implementing the USAID project for any of their partners and there are fraud-related cases, the USAID can burn the forest to uncover that $1 missing dollar. I know a lot of us are going to be talking about, oh, at treatment sites, there are issues around this and that. But the truth is, if it's reported, the USAID will leave no stone unturned. Many times organizations have refunded monies to the USAID because the USAID will say these are not allowable expenses. The USAID guarded America's taxpayers' money jealously. They may have their internal issues, no doubt. But the things I see Elon Musk and the Congress guys ranting about are not as you see them. That the US has no presence in a particular environment does not mean that interventions may not go through. It does also mean that the US will not also investigate and carry out background checks to be sure that there are no cases of terrorism, there are no cases of money laundering. It's not the job of the USAID to do that. It's the job of the FBI. The USAID does that due diligence, gets its approval, then they certify every partner that they are free to work. It's completely laughable to see how they're throwing out all this information and everyone is jumping at it. One thing we need to know from these arguments, left and right, is that only Africans, only independent countries mean well for themselves. All they're throwing out is not for you to begin to think that they are doing these things to justify anything for you. Elon Musk, Donald Trump, none of these guys care about Africa. They are playing their usual politics, and Africa and other countries are just the victims here. We must learn to go beyond the headlines. We must ignore what is happening currently. Before the USAID came, I hope we understand how Africa had the pandemic of HIV and AIDS and what the funding was like before then. People were dying of AIDS because there were no funding. I'm going to get into that story in my next video. There were no funding. Philly Bongoli Lutaya had to do advocacy. When he realized he was going to die, he had AIDS. He suffered stigmatization, he suffered rejections, even churches rejected him. It took just one bishop, an Anglican bishop, who summoned the courage to have him talk to his people. And he began to beg the world to help because we were in that spot where AIDS was ravaging Africa. The USAID came. They tackled HIV/AIDS. They tackled OVC projects, orphans and the vulnerable children. They began to fund governance. They began to fund agriculture. And today, this is what we hear about the USAID. This is not the USAID most of us implemented projects on. This is not the USAID that turned around situations of our people and our various communities. While America is playing politics, we must understand that the USAID, like every institution, has its own problems. However, the allegations against the USAID, particularly areas where we have worked, are really not true. And they can be true. I've also read where they try to share videos of Goodluck Jonathan accusing Obama and blaming him for his loss at the poll. But let's ask ourselves a question. But if Obama was interested in replacing Goodluck, was Obama responsible for the kidnap of the Chibok girls? That argument also came up. Okay, if Obama had a hand, was Obama the reason why it took Goodluck Jonathan 2 weeks before he reacted to the missing Chibok girls? I don't think all these things are true. This is the rationalization theory at work. And everyone who wants to spin this story will spin it in their favor. It's easy to put the pieces together, but a smart person will be able to disentangle these lies. What is currently happening will not lead to the end of the USAID. What I see happening is the big guys, the oligarchs, are interested in the contracts in the USAID. There are a lot of money there. There are a lot of big contractors there. And it's more or less create the storm, retrieve the system, and fix your guys there. And this is what is happening in Ukraine. This is what Trump plans to do in Gaza. This is what he wants to do in Africa. And if we're not smart, we will think that the USAID is the problem. But there's another bigger problem in all this argument. The way these guys are going about these things is also going to be affecting the image of America and Americans carrying out missionary work independent of the government in Africa and the rest of the world. These congressmen are also pitching people against the missionaries that are in Rwanda, in Africa, in Nigeria, in Congo, in all parts of Africa. Americans work very hard to raise money to go to Africa to carry out missionary works. They are independent of the government. But issues like this, we begin to throw integrity questions into their activities. And it's not a smart way of playing politics. All you are reading, all you are listening to, most of them are all politics. If they are funding transgender intervention, it is because they are also targeting the general population that could be infected. Nobody wants to make gains and lose it. You may not want to carry out such interventions, but when you look at the larger gains, you have no choice but to get it done. You also cannot begin to go into war fraud where you know that there could be escalation of HIV/AIDS, and you won't have to find a way to get into those communities. I've been there a couple of times, and 4 times I've had near-death experience, and all of them were on the USAID project. And I had colleagues who even had a much more difficult experience in some of these locations, even when it was the heat of the war. Because if you don't do it and there's an outbreak, there's going to be a big issue. Health workers are targeted globally, and humanitarian agencies are always being accused. But I'm speaking up today because if we don't address these issues, it has a way of affecting philanthropy. It has a way of affecting donations. And people love to give to address different causes. What Trump, Elon Musk, and the oligarchs are doing will not be in the interest of the common man that are experiencing sufferings around the world. For me, I have to speak up. I encourage everyone to tell their own side of stories about their interventions. I've managed many interventions, from the USAID to the Global Fund to the Gates, and a whole lot of them, and a whole lot will come. I'd love to read your comment on this issue, and I hope to see you in the next video.
Real issues with Kagwa, all the truths you've never seen.